How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 6 of What If Deku Had a Regeneration Quirk. And before I begin, I would like to say I'm sorry if the mic quality is a bit bad, as my computer has just basically stopped working and I cannot record on that anymore, so I am now recording on my Chromebook, and it doesn't really have the best of audio quality, and I'm just using some random voice recording app through, the Google Play Store. So yeah, I thank you all for watching, and now, let's begin. I forgot to mention this, but please go comment your what if suggestions down in the comment section below, as this weekend is going to be the start of a new what if that I will be making, so please comment your what if suggestions down below. And now, let's begin. Izuku would be waiting in the waiting room for the cavalry battle to begin. Of course, he didn't know it was the cavalry battle, as the first event, the racing event, he had just finished, and now would have to wait just around 10 to 15 minutes before it would end, as Izuku didn't have any place to look up at a TV which had the time and clock where he could see how much time was left. So Izuku was just forced to wait there with the two other people that had passed, being Todoroki and Bakugo. Bakugo would have gotten first and Todoroki second. Bakugo getting a newfound rage, saying, "How could this just half and half person beat me? He has two half-powered quirks while I have one full-powered quirk, and I should be able to beat him." And this clearly wasn't the case. Bakugo had no clue about any of Todoroki's quirks, besides knowing it was fire and ice. That is it. So Izuku would just be waiting there for 10 to 15 minutes, and after that, he would finally be able to do something, as he would be able to walk out of the waiting room, as he would then stand in a massive group. As Midnight would then step up to the podium and would start talking and explaining the second event. Izuku didn't have enough time to get in a group and have enough friends or know enough people to get a group for the cavalry battle. So when Midnight was explaining how it was going to be a team event, Izuku already knew he was going to be screwed. But thankfully, since he got third place, there were many people wanting to join his team simply because of the points he has. So Izuku would be sitting there waiting for something to happen, as Midnight would tell them they have now 5 minutes to make your teams, and after that, if you don't have a team, you're on your own for the rest of the event. Good luck, and now start. As the 5 minutes would then start counting down, as people would start to rush over to random people trying to get into their group. Of course, Bakugo, having the 10 million point headband, would only have 2 people go. Sorry about that cutoff, guys. Like I said, I'm using some random app off of the Google Play Store, and it legit just crashed on me, so sorry that it just cut off. As I was saying, Bakugo would only have 2 people come up to him to join his group, these being Kirishima and Kaminari. Kaminari going to Bakugo would also cause Mineta to end up wanting to join Bakugo's group as well. So Bakugo would now have a full team of people on his side, as Todoroki would then make a group, and that leaving Izuku out of the top 3 to not have a group. Now, Izuku would get a lot of people wanting to join his group, them seeing that the second place winner had already been taken off and his team had now already been made. They would need to find another person in the top 5 or top 10 to make a group with, and one of those people being Izuku, who placed 3rd. So one of the people that would end up joining his group was Uraraka, as Hatsume would also join his group, and also Tokiyami, this being the exact same team Izuku had in the sports festival in Canon My Hero Academia. So when the cavalry battle would finally begin, they would just work on protecting the amount of points he had. Todoroki would end up having a 1,000 point headband, while Izuku would have a 500. They decided if they just looked at how much points each team had up on the leaderboard, that would be constantly shifting and moving, and if they could stay in the top 4, that would be good enough. As they wanted to stay in top 5, but top 4 would be better, as they think they're not just going to have only 2 teams or 3 teams move on, they're going to have at least 4. And just to be safe, safe. Instead of being the 5th team, they'll be the 4th team. So that 500 points would really help, as they would just set off to try to dodge as many people as possible. Them being 3rd wouldn't get as much attention as either Bakugo or Todoroki. So Izuku got one of the best places he could have gotten. So Izuku would continue this, being just dodging everyone who would go for them, which was a small group of teams, maybe around 3 out of the 10 to 12 some teams there were. I can't really remember how many teams there were. There were just a lot of teams in Ken and My Hero Academia, and I don't think very many people know the exact number of teams that were there. So Izuku and his team would end up passing, as they would then be told they can go back into the waiting room, while those who were eliminated can now go into the stands to watch the rest of just the tournament. And now the 3rd and final event will be the 1v1 tournament, and they will now take a 30-minute rest and lunch break until they can figure out who shall be in the bracket or not. By now, it had already been an hour and a half since the 12 p.m. start time. So it was around 1:30, and they were now being given lunch and all of that, as they just needed to take a break for the contestants that were going to be doing the tournament, and also just for the people in the stands who were now hungry and didn't want to eat while watching the tournament. So when this 30-minute break was up, and they finally began the 1v1 tournament, Izuku and his team would end up going against, or not his team, just Izuku would end up going against Shinso, just like in canon My Hero Academia. So Izuku would walk up onto just this tournament style arena. It's the exact same block as it was in the anime. So he would look over at Shinso, as Shinso would tell him that he's going to lose, as Izuku would not really say anything. Now, the reason of this is because while he was walking up, he would end up being stopped by Ojiro while in the waiting room, where Ojiro would say that he saw Izuku going up against Shinso. While Ojiro has never even met or talked to Izuku before, he wanted him to know not to answer any of Shinso's questions. He's just looking out for someone or a fellow student in Class 1A, even though they've never talked or even met before, because this is basically the first time Izuku has ever met any of the people in Class 1A. So Izuku would thank Ojiro and would then go out onto the block. Izuku, not taking any risks, would take Ojiro's word that Shinso had some type of mind control or mind reading quirk. So he would decide not to talk rather than having a big mouth, something that Bakugo would probably have lost to if he was up against Shinso in the first round. So Izuku would wait for the match to begin, as Midnight would then yell begin, as Shinso would start trying to just insult Izuku, like insulting his classmates. However, something that Shinso did not know is that Izuku was not even in Class 1A for the past 2 months or past 3 months. He wasn't in Class 1A. He has no clue who these people he's insulting. The only person or person's name he knows in Class 1A is Ojiro. So he really doesn't know even what their quirks are. So something like Shinso, who's been watching them closely, just trying to spit out insults, he's insulting the wrong person because Izuku doesn't know any of the things he's insulting. So it goes completely ineffective, as Izuku would just have his mind blank. He has no clue what Shinso's even talking about. So deciding to end it quickly, which is something Aizawa taught him, is to always end the fight as quickly as possible. It's better to end it quickly rather than to draw it on for longer than it has to be and get more lives hurt or damaged in the process. So Izuku would rush in and would take out Shinso quickly by grabbing Shinso's neck and slamming him onto the ground in sort of type a chokehold thing, as Shinso would then not be able to continue, as he would look at Midnight, as if telling her through his eyes that he has lost and he cannot continue this. So she would end the match as Izuku would then get up and start to walk back to the waiting room, while Shinso would have to walk back into the stands. He had gotten the farthest out of anybody in Class 1C. Nobody else from any classes below the hero course had even made it to the 1v1 tournament, just Shinso. So it was a massive feat for all of the lower level classes. So Izuku would watch through one of the TVs in the waiting room what was happening next, all of the different matches, as finally the first round would end up being over, as the second round would end up starting. Izuku, having had to take the first match of the first round, would get to take the last match of the second round, so he would have more time to rest, and someone who took the second match of the first round would also be put in the last round, or the last match of the second round. So Izuku sitting there waiting for something to happen, as he would see all of the different fights going on, who would end up going on to the semifinals, and who he wanted to verse in the semifinals. However, he saw that Bakugo was in a completely different bracket than he was, as Izuku would smile happily at this. Izuku knew since Bakugo was in a different bracket, he was going to be able to take on Bakugo in the finals if he won his next two fights. So his next fight would finally announce that it was going to be him versus Todoroki, as they would be forced to walk up onto the arena, as Todoroki would look at Izuku just completely confused. Todoroki had gotten to see what all of his classmates' quirks were, since he had been their classmate for over 2 months, and since that, he knew all of their weaknesses by just watching them and how they played out in the hero training that they did with All Might. So, when it came to his battle with Izuku, he had no clue what Izuku's quirk was. Izuku had not even used his quirk at all during the sports festival. His quirk is completely useless in the sports festival. It's a regeneration quirk. It's really only good for fighting villains. And so Izuku is much like Shinso. His quirk's not going to help him defeat robots. I mean, sure, it's going to help him if he punches metal and breaks his fists or knuckles, but sure, that's a little bit of help boosting him, but it's not going to help his athletic performance at all. So Izuku knew that his quirk wasn't the best for something like this, something like Bakugo or Todoroki's quirks. So Aizawa, also knowing this, would train Izuku extensively during that month how to use martial arts, how to use different sorts of weapons too. Since Izuku couldn't use weapons, he would rely on his martial arts that he had learned from Aizawa. And so the match would begin, as Todoroki would send a massive iceberg right at Izuku, as Izuku would jump out of the way, dodging it, as Izuku would be forced to come up with a game plan on what he should do against Todoroki. He had nothing or no plan at all for how his fight should play out against Todoroki. He had no clue what to do at all. So Izuku would be forced to start thinking about how he should play his cards, as Izuku would start to jump around, making it a lot harder for Todoroki to accurately predict where he should shoot his next iceberg to hopefully hit Izuku. So Izuku hopping around as fast as he could, as if he was just jumping around the arena, as he would all of a sudden immediately switch directions, making it impossible for Todoroki just to send a massive iceberg right in front of Izuku. As Izuku would jump sideways or diagonal, he would continue doing this jagged motion, making it harder for Todoroki to even predict his actions, as Todoroki would start to become dizzy, as he would continually send these icebergs out as they would go nowhere, as it was just making it easier for Izuku to dodge his attacks. By making walls around the arena, Izuku could jump off of the ice, breaking it and shattering it so that it wasn't an obstacle in the future, while also using it as something to get out of the way from something of one of Todoroki's attacks. So Izuku would all of a sudden appear next to Todoroki, who had already started suffering from frostbite, as Izuku would punch Todoroki's cheek right across the face, as Todoroki would slide, barely catching himself with an iceberg, as Todoroki would start to breathe very heavily. Todoroki had used his iceberg quirk to the point where he had started frostbite, and he would get very hurt if he continued what he was doing, and Izuku would see this. However, Izuku knew if he was going to move on to the semifinals and hopefully the finals, he was going to have to use this to his advantage. Izuku doesn't know Todoroki has a fire quirk, so he can never say, "Use your fire, Todoroki." Now, this would of course be yelled by Endeavor, but Izuku had blocked out the crowd entirely. All he could hear was midnight and just the announcers basically announcing everything that was happening. So Izuku would continue his strategy as Todoroki would continually just get more and more frostbite, and finally Todoroki would fall to his knees and would pass out from frostbite, as Izuku would wave to Midnight as if saying, "Bring some type of ambulance or bring health down here, or first aid down here to help assist Todoroki." And all of a sudden a very short grandma type person would end up running out onto the field, as immediately two bigger guys would end up coming out holding a stretcher, placing Todoroki onto it, running out, as you can see Recovery Girl putting something into Todoroki's arm, hopefully trying to heal him, as Todoroki would be taken off to the first aid center. Izuku knew what he was doing, but it doesn't matter. This is a tournament, and if you're going to do that, you're doing that to yourself. It's not his fault. You basically lost the tournament because of yourself. Izuku landed one punch, and that was it. That's all it took, as Todoroki would just continually try and do this, as the one punch caused Todoroki to become more desperate, sending more and more icebergs, which led to him getting frostbite faster and the match going by a lot faster. And finally, the semifinals would begin, as Izuku would be put in the first round of the semifinals, putting that right next to each other. And since he was going to be versing Ida, he had to try to conserve as much energy as possible. He had a 5-minute break, and he needed to just get as much rest as possible. So Izuku would sit down on the arena as it was getting cleaned up and just destroying all of the ice around it, as Izuku would be sitting there, thinking he doesn't have enough time to go to the waiting room and back, as that would just be a severe waste of energy. So he would just sit there, waiting for something to happen or waiting for the semifinals to begin. And this would actually work in favor for Izuku. Izuku would end up getting a lot of his energy back, and it finally came to versing Ida. Izuku would see the engines in Ida's leg, as Izuku would then realize that is a major just weak point for Ida. If Izuku trips Ida, which Izuku made the assumption Ida has some sort of speed quirk, if all Izuku has to do is trip up Ida's footing, and he falls down, that is an easy victory. But the problem is catching up and getting close enough to Ida to where you could trip him. So Izuku would be sitting there thinking of a game plan as the match would begin. Immediately, Izuku would punch the ground, hoping that it would break. And of course it wouldn't, but it would crack, as Izuku would continue smashing his fist into the pavement, as it would finally break open as Izuku was able to grab a rock, as he would then run to the center, as Ida, seeing his chance and opportunity, would start to run circles around Izuku, as if trapping him inside of his circle that he was running around. Izuku would start to calculate everything that Ito was doing. As Izuku would see how fast Ito was moving, as Izuku would hopefully just take a shot with the rock and throw it in the line of fire with his feet. And Izuku got severely lucky, as it would hit Ita's foot, causing him to look down, stumbling down as he would slam into the pavement, sliding against it, as Izuku would jump into action, grabbing Ita's neck, pinning him to the ground, as the match would end much like it had against Shinso. And finally, Izuku would be going against Bakugo. Here it was, the final match, Izuku versus Bakugo. This was it. As Izuku would be told that there is going to be a 15-minute break before then, as Izuku would just rather stand on the arena, and that's exactly what he did, as the crowd would see Izuku standing right on the arena waiting for Bakugo, as Bakugo would finally walk onto the arena after the 15 minutes had passed. Izuku, who had been waiting there for 15 minutes, now having plenty of energy. As the match would begin, Bakugo immediately jumping in, sending himself flying towards Izuku with explosions blasting off of his hands, as he would reach Izuku and would put his hand around Izuku's head, making a massive explosion. This surely would have killed any normal person, as the smoke would reveal Izuku's head half gone, as his left eye was completely missing, as his brain was clearly visible. The crowd would gasp in shock, as Izuku's brain would start to slosh out of his head, slamming itself against the ground. However, in moments, Izuku's head would reconstruct itself, just appearing right back to normal, and Izuku taking the shock factor that Bakugo had just witnessed into account, Izuku would take his fist and throw it right at Bakugo's face, punching it right between his eyes, shattering Bakugo's nose, as Bakugo would fall to the ground holding his nose, which he now had a bloody nose. Izuku had just broken it, as Bakugo would start to scramble back, sending out an explosion to hopefully make some distance against him and Izuku, as Izuku would then appear right next to Bakugo, as Izuku would then punch Bakugo's nose again, as Bakugo would scream out in pain. Izuku had broken it, and since that, he could use that to his advantage, as Bakugo would then jump up, starting to look around. He had made a massive cloud of smoke, and he had no clue where Izuku could be, as Izuku would then appear right behind Bakugo, putting Bakugo into a chokehold and knocking him out. Izuku had won so swiftly and easily, the entirety of Class 1A was in shock, as Aizawa would just smile, as Aizawa wasn't able to teach any of the students how he taught Izuku. He had restrictions on what he could teach the students. However, with Izuku, Nezu didn't tell him anything. Nezu basically said, go ahead, teach him whatever you wanted. All he has to do is be caught up in the hero and academics that they have already learned throughout the past 2 months. And so, Aizawa got through this in 1 week, with Izuku's very fast learning that Izuku has gotten, as this is basically the same Izuku as in canon. Izuku loves to learn. He has not been in school since the age of 4, which Izuku would end up loving to learn, as he would be able to easily go through all of the work Aizawa would give him in just a week. So this would give them 3 weeks to do all of the things Aizawa wanted to teach the students but couldn't, which involved deadly martial arts, which Izuku would end up using on Bakugo, allowing Bakugo to easily be defeated by Izuku. And after 30 minutes, the arena would be gone, as the podium ceremony would finally take place. Izuku in first place, Bakugo in third place, and Tokiyami in third place. And that's how it would be, as Izuku would smile with his third place medal on his chest and around his neck, as Class 1A would finally realize who they just had in their class. And that's where I'm going to leave it off, guys. I hope you guys did enjoy Part 6 of What If Deku had a Regeneration Quirk. Part 7 should be out on Monday, as Saturday and Sunday is going to be a new What If, possibly one of the What If suggestions you all leave down in the comment section below. So make sure you do that if you want to see one of your What If suggestions become one of my videos. Of course, there's no guarantee that it will happen, but there is a chance. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.